All right, students, we are back to finish our lecture on Rome. The majority of this lecture is going to focus on religion and sacred spaces, which is a fascinating subject. So we will introduce religion and sacred spaces in Rome with the knowledge that it's a huge, rich topic. So we can say, I think it's fair to say, that the gods of Rome are similar, if not taken directly from the Etruscans. The Etruscans themselves, we know, had a pantheon of gods drawn from many sources, some local, some Greek. And so this is a complicated subject. And if this were a different kind of class, we would talk about syncretism. It's really hard to know if a god is worshipped because that god originated with that land and with that people, or it came in from elsewhere. Or if gods that we think were imported from elsewhere just were shared by all of these people at the same time and they're all local. It doesn't really matter. What we can say is that the Etruscans and the Romans had some gods that we only see in that particular geographical area, and they have some gods that we see in other areas. Whether that means they were local or imported, doesn't really matter. But so some of the gods we're going to talk about will be familiar to you if you know anything about Greek or Roman mythology, Greek mythology, and some will not. So each god has had, for the Etruscans and for the Romans, each god had his or her own place in the sky, and an understanding of the pleasure or the displeasure of the gods could be gained from watching the flight of birds, flashes of lightning, or from any other unusual event. The augurs, responsible for interpreting the signs, would then prescribe the correct rituals for their appeasement. So this is a description of bird augury, of looking at the flight of birds and other things in the sky to figure out the will, the intent, the mood of the gods, and to change your actions accordingly. So it's a really interesting thing. Basically, an augur, who's essentially kind of a priest, would find a space in the sky, and he would like find a specific space in the sky. It was usually like a rectangle like this. And that space in the sky was called a templum. So same as the word temple. And he would look to see how birds crossed and from what side they crossed. And if they went diagonal, if they went up, if they went down, and each kind of path through that temple indicated a different view of the gods. So it's basically doing in the sky the same thing other religious priests would do when they looked at the entrails of animals. It's a way of kind of decoding the messages of the gods through a specific kind of area. So this was an Etruscan practice, but it was definitely picked up by the Romans. As our book points out, and I didn't need to start with that, but that's just an interesting element of Roman religion because the Romans believed so strongly in things like bird augury that it highly influenced their actions. Like before every battle, the bird augur would come out and read the signs in the sky to decide if the situation was auspicious for battle or not. So that was a very big part of Roman religion. But as our book says too, the cohesion of the state was maintained through religious ritual. So remember that the government, the consuls, the kings, imperium included not just governing of the city, but governing of religion. And that was because just like in Athens, the idea of the gods and religion was so intertwined with everything that they did that, of course, the running of the state was supported by and influenced by religious ritual. And we can see that archaeologically just by looking at the Capitoline Hill. So this was kind of the center. This is one of the hills of Rome. It's in the little red thing here. I do think this is from our book. I'm pretty sure this is from our book. Hopefully, I should know that. I'll figure it out. But so this is the Capitoline Hill. This would be the center of religious work in the center of Rome. And you can see how many different gods and goddesses are represented here. So there's a temple of Juno. There's a temple of Jupiter the Guardian. There's a temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus. Here's another temple of Jupiter Tonon. So all of the Jupiter ones are different elements of Jupiter, the thundering element of him, the ruling element of him, the guardian element of him. There's other, the Temple of Concord is here. the temple of there should be one other. There's more Jupiter. Mars is a big deal, Bellona. So the worship, the paying your dues to the gods was a huge part of Roman life. What's interesting too is that here's where like all this religion activity would be happening, right on the Capitoline Hill. Here's Campus Martius. This is where the army would come and practice their things. This is a gathering point for the army. So you see this very close proximity of religious worship and martial exercises, exercises of the army. They were very closely tied together. The gods that they primarily worshipped, especially in the Republic, are what are called the Capitoline Triad. Capitoline refers to the hill where all those temples were, and the Triad are the three most important gods. So, unsurprisingly, Jupiter, who is equated with Zeus, they're basically the same sky god figure. That's, of course, the number one god. That's the Pater. That's the father of the gods. That's the father of Rome, essentially. Then, unsurprisingly, there's his wife, Juno. Now, Juno is often associated with Hera, the Greek goddess Hera, but Juno, by all accounts, was held in greater respect among the Romans. She herself started out not as Hera, like, oh, just Hera came to Rome, but as an ancient Italian goddess. So she's a much more kind of associated with this land goddess. And so she's associated with the needs of women, fertility, and the sanctity of marriage. So she takes on a lot of Hera's aspects, but she has just a more rich history than simply Hera imported into Rome. And then there's Minerva, who also is kind of associated with Athena, but Minerva herself probably existed in Italy for a much longer time than the Greeks arriving. And so she's associated also. Oh, did I just copy this? This is wrong. I should change this. Minerva is associated with war, with arts, with cleverness, with cunning. And so I will make sure to update this. But so those three, Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva, were the three kind of most important gods in ancient Rome during the Republic. But you might be asking, what about Mars? He was also a big one. Oh, that's weird. I should have had a slide. Sorry. End of the semester. The worship of Mars, the god of war, grew as Rome grew, and Rome became much more dependent upon military conquest. So the worship of Mars became much more important. Another really interesting thing, if you're interested, but which we do not have time to talk about now, is that the army itself, because it incorporated so many different peoples from so many different places, would develop a kind of cults, like specific worship of specific gods from other places. Rome eventually would become very famous, actually, for incorporating gods from various places around the Mediterranean into Roman worship. They were actually, Roman religion was quite flexible in terms of bringing in other gods. I think for many people that will seem counterintuitive because Rome did persecute the Christians. Roman emperors did not love Christianity. That is all true. But that wasn't because they didn't like the God of the Christians. It was because they didn't like the behavior of the Christians themselves. So that's a whole other thing, a whole other class. It's really interesting. I would love to talk to you about it more. But the Roman treatment of the Christians was an exception. Usually they were very chill about other religions. So also, and this is just for me, our book doesn't talk about this, but I think it's really important to talk about that the Romans had a bunch of weird little gods that are so interesting that we don't talk about very much because they were kind of subsumed by that Capitoline Triad and the big gods, right? But from very early Roman times, we know that they worshipped things like the god of rust or the god of doors, just these simple elemental things that if you think about it, you can kind of understand why they would have been so intrigued. So rust is something that just kind of shows up out of nowhere. You have a piece of metal, you have something that's pristine and fine, and then 2 days later it's covered in rust. And keep in mind, Rome is very close to the Mediterranean, so rust would be a real issue, right? And because they didn't know how rust worked, as if I know, they thought, oh, well, this must be a god. And so it's this god Robigo. Robigo is specifically the god of wheat, rust growing on wheat. but that was a deity that they had a festival for. Janus, who is the god of doorways, entrances, you may have seen statues where you have like kind of a stele or like a pillar, and it has one face on one side and another face on the other side. That's Janus, the god of doors. Then there's the god of night thunder, Sumanus. Sumanus is different from Jupiter, who is the god of day thunder. And then Terminus, the god of boundary markers. He was weirdly important. Like Ovid has a whole poem to him. So they had these kind of big gods that are very familiar to us, but they also had these very kind of interesting, smaller, more kind of local gods that were really that we just don't know that much about, but I think is worth thinking about. They also had these things, and this is what really distinguishes Roman religion from Greek religion, and that is the Lares and the Penates. So there's a lot to suggest that these aren't that different from one another. These are household gods. That's basically how they're described as household gods. Technically, Lares are the guardian spirits. They're the kind of spirits of your family members who have already died, whereas Penates are the spirits that guard your food, that make sure your pantry always has enough of food. These are the Penates. Basically, what they were was little statues that you had in your house in like a little kind of, you can see here, this is like, this would be a kitchen wall, and this would be a little altar, essentially, where you would put your lares and penates, and you would worship them, and you would take care of them, and you would, treat them like little household gods. They were so important that in the Aeneid, as we will see, Aeneas is the hero. His house is burning down, his city is burning down, but he makes sure to go home to not only get his child, but also to get his lares and his penates. Like it was incredibly important to keep those safe and to show them respect because they watched over your household. So I love that. I love that aspect of Roman religion. It's a really important part that we don't really talk too much about, I think. So, yes. Oh, sorry. I anticipated myself. Yes. So here is Mars, Mars, the god of war, which of course the Romans loved. But the Romans were also very enamored with Venus, the goddess of love. Venus, in fact, as we will see when we look at the Aeneid, is the mother of Aeneas, who is one of the founders of Rome. So essentially, Rome traces itself to Venus as one of its parents. So these two gods, this is a Pompeian fresco, and they are portrayed together often, Thanatos, Amor, that sort of thing. But so these were very important figures for the Romans as well. So I think that is Roman religion. Ah, here's the temple of Mars the Avenger, Mars Ultor. And it is here. I think I'm not even going to speculate. I used to know who this was put up by. This was put up right at the end of the Republic, the beginning of the empire. So, yes. Okay, so here is our last pillar, and I'm sorry to let you down, but we are not going to talk very much about art, literature, and memory in Rome. Because if I start talking about it now, I will literally never stop talking, and it will be September, and we will be exhausted. There's so much to say about this. Um, I am going to tell you, though, that though Rome produced an amazing amount of literature, one of the most notable things about Roman literature and art and theater and all of it is that it is all heavily indebted to Greece for inspiration, for form, for subject matter, for everything. Almost every bit of Roman literature you will see, with perhaps the exception of their satires, which are amazing, but they're all basically built on and elaborations of Greek literature. So as you can see here in early Republic, almost all art was inspired by Greek models. So Polybius is our first historian of Rome. He is actually a Greek. Livius Andronicus is one of our first dramatists, playwrights, imported Greek plays. Plautus is, some people love him. He's a Greek comedian. He's a Roman comedian, but he basically just rewrote Greek plays. The first Roman poet is Ennius. There's the cat. She wanted to make sure to see you. Ennius basically used Greek models to portray Roman themes. We do not have a lot of Ennius left. I'm sorry, I even told you his name. Nobody knows anything about him, really. Terrence is really interesting because we had a guest speaker at San Diego State a couple years ago, and she was talking about Terrence, and she basically hated him, like she hated his work, but she felt like it was important to talk about him because he was from North Africa before he came to Rome. Anyhow, Terrence basically used Greek models, and then the Romans even copied the Greek athletic games. So that's for me, like that's the biggest thing about Rome, is they were great warriors, they were great politicians, they were great salts. But all of their literature, as good as it can be, and some of it can be very good, was a copy of Greek. So we are going to read, for the very last thing we do in this class, we're going to read the first few hundred lines of the Iliad. And if you've already read it, I'm sorry. They're beautiful. They're amazing. The Aeneid is the great epic poem of Rome that tells the story of Rome. Um, from a much later perspective. But the Aeneid is basically just Homer's Odyssey and Homer's Iliad put together with a Trojan hero who founds Rome. So it's beautiful, it's amazing, it's worth reading, but it is Greek. So that's my big art literature memory of Rome. So with that, don't be discouraged. Read the first few hundred lines of the Aeneid. The PDF is available to you. I found a translation that I think is really, it's very readable, very solid. And we will end this class at the beginning of Roman history. It'll be amazing. So come back for that. But thank you for coming through all these pillars lectures with me. I know that they didn't give us the entire building of the cities, but I hope that they gave you enough to kind of see what the city was built on and around. So thank you for your patience and for your enthusiasm for the subject. And I will see you when we talk about Virgil. Okay. Oh, I messed this up. It was supposed to be so good. Hang on. What am I gonna do? Oh no. Okay. I just thought, did I not record? Okay, I'm gonna stop recording. Thank you. I will see you next time.